Okay, I think we can start. Well, welcome everyone, and welcome Stefanie. I'll just read out lesson 258. Let me remember that my goal is God. Our goal is but to follow in the way that leads to you. We have no goal but this. What could we want but to remember you? What could we seek but our own identity? Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome Stefanie. Now, Stefanie, you were here a couple of weeks ago, so you have an idea of what's happening. So start whenever you like and tell us whatever you think is appropriate for us to hear, and we'll take it from there, maybe ask some questions later, if that's okay.
That's fantastic. And is there anything in particular that you would like for me to share, or do you want me to just kind of start as guided?
Yeah, as guided, or start from the beginning, or both.
All right. Let me just close my eyes for one little moment. You know, it's funny, over the last couple of weeks, since Lloyd did his interview, I was thinking I'd really love to share a little bit about an experience that I went through. Well, it started 2 years ago, and I am going to share that experience at some point here this evening. And I like to call the experience the eye of the needle. And it's another way of saying it's an intense purification period that I feel that everyone goes through or will go through at some point on their journey. What that's going to look like for everyone will differ, but there are many characteristics in this experience that, you know, I feel like we can all relate to. So I will build up to that and maybe just talk about that. There's so many different things I'd like to share. So I'm just going to start from the beginning. I found A Course in Miracles about 22 years ago. And I had just gone through a relationship breakup, and I was really feeling at the end of my rope. And I remember looking, it was in Newfoundland at the time. I was going to Memorial University. And I remember looking up and like into the clouds. I was just out for a walk one day. I was on campus, and I looked up and I said, I'm doing this to myself. I'm creating all this conflict that I'm going through, doing it to myself. And in that moment, I made a great realization. And I came to a choice point that I was doing it unto myself, and it was very powerful. Now, I hadn't really been doing the course. I was dabbling in it. I hadn't actually read it. I was around people that were speaking the course language, so I was getting familiar with vocabulary, you know, and so Spirit got me there in that moment, and I made that deep choice. And not only did I say that I was creating all my own conflict, but I knew in that moment that I could change. So that was the first deep decision that I made. And I went through a period of, I set up a little area in my living room where I would go every day and I would grieve the loss of myself. And I would just, I didn't know what I was doing. I was forgiving at that time, but I didn't really know what forgiveness was. But I would go in and I would just take all the emotions that were coming up, you know, in the light of the day, and I would bring it up into the light of my mind, and I would just look at it. And this is the first time that I had actually done that, because I spent a very big part of my life looking for love outside of myself and blaming other people. You know, blaming my family, you name it, I blamed them. I blamed life. And so this was a huge shift for me. So I went through this for probably about 6 months. And at the end of this 6 months, I experienced something for the first time in my life. And that something was peace. And I felt that I was in a cave, and all of a sudden I felt like little drips of water coming down from the top of the cave. I didn't know where the peace was coming from, and I didn't even care. I just knew that for the first time in my life, I had had an experience of something that felt truly relieving and wonderful to the mind. And so I did A Course in Miracles. I was in a position in my life where I took a year off, and I just became very committed to doing the workbook. So I started with the workbook, and I would get up every morning. I would approach the lesson with reverence. I took it very seriously, very lightly, but seriously at the same time. And I had a friend that would come over for coffee, and I would just share the workbook lesson with him. And that helped me, to reiterate it and to teach as you're learning. So I went through that process. And so, we'll continue on my life journey. I spent 20 years on my own. Now, I say on my own without a partner. That was a decision that I made. I was a single parent, so I had left a marriage and raised my daughter on my own. And I was doing, A Course in Miracles and other things as well at the time. And so I was living in St. John's, Newfoundland. And so basically I spent 20 years in I would call it a very peaceful and simple life. I worked in sales. I spent a lot of time with friends. We used to do retreats, lots of different meetings. I had great friends. But I really dedicated that time to doing a very deep purification forgiveness work. So then I facilitated a retreat weekend in a place called Strawberry Resort, which was right next to Corner Brook, Newfoundland. And we had about 75 people there for the weekend, various presenters, and we had a wonderful weekend. And on my way home from that retreat, I began to experience a feeling of bliss at the top of my head, which I hadn't experienced before. And it just felt really profound. It was a deep sense of peace and joy and a blissful feeling. And I knew that I was on the precipice of something. I went back to St. John's and I had a tea with a friend of mine, and I said, I feel that I'm on the precipice of something. I can't tell you what it is, but there's something happening that I can't put my finger on. Now, what I'm doing right now, by the way, I'm segueing into the next, let's call it stage of my journey. So one night, it was actually May 24th weekend, 2017. I went to bed and went to sleep like any other night. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up with an incredible experience of love in the mind. And I started to hear all these sentences being presented to me. There were little tiny short sentences. I didn't know where they were coming from. And my only job was to work as a secretary. In other words, I got up with my cell phone and started to text myself all these short sentences. I would get up in the morning and I would have no idea what I had typed out, but my job was to piece together these short sentences, which composed stanzas, which in turn became poems. And 5 days later, I had written or channeled 100 poems from what was identified as the mighty angels from a mighty high up plane, and they were coming to me. Now, at that point, over like the first night or during the first day, I didn't really know what this was. I was consumed by just getting the information down word for word. That was my only job. But as I was walking from the washroom to the bedroom the next day, I heard a little quiet voice in my mind say, "We, the angels of heaven, are here to help you now." And in that moment, I knew it was angels. I didn't know it before. And I said, "Oh my God, these are angels that have come with a message and some kind of a task, obviously, for me to do." So I drank this in. I completely embraced it. But before I continue on with that, I just want to say that A Course in Miracles was a very big part of preparing me for this task that would be presented to me. And I became very committed to the course, really 5 years. I say I was doing it for 22 years, but 5 to 6 years before I began to have this channeling task, I would get up in the morning well, number one, I was working with the course every single day. It's a highly individualized curriculum and a self-study, and I really took it on. I would really work with it. But about 3 months before May 24th weekend, I would get up in the morning and I would walk into my living room and I would completely empty my mind of all thoughts. And I began to cultivate this single pointed focus meditation stance, let's call it. And I would just walk in the living room and I'd say, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And I could feel my mind melting into the mind of God. And so I just wanted to mention that because that was the preparatory stage for this happening. And I can tell you now that once you prepare your mind to become a channel of peace, you'll never know how that's going to show up. That's the one thing I've learned. It's not to have any expectations or to know anything about it. Like you just open up and it will come the way it comes. And it's not going to happen until we're ready for it. So again, so this happened. So I wrote a book in 5 days and I had it self-published. And, the front of the book was given to me, even the vision and the back book cover was given to me. And the title of the book, that was all. So that was a done deal. And my job was to take it and act on it, because I was told after that was part of the reason why this was given to me, was because the angels knew that I was going to actually act on it. And so then I started working with the angels, AKA the Holy Spirit, because this was a manifestation of the Holy Spirit. I began to work with them very beautifully and wonderfully. They would just tell me things and give me hints and guide me and give me messages. And I started to receive channels that looked different than the poems. So in other words, the poems were one piece, but then it shifted into full informational channels, which I have on my website. I have like about 150 of these channels on my website. And then I started to hear a very different group of beings one day who introduced themselves as the Palladians. So this was very exciting because I never knew what was going to show up. Like I'd be laying on my Reiki table and Archangel Michael arrived. Now, in the meantime, I've never seen an angel. I only hear them. So it's an auditory process for me. And I'm a written channel, which means I'm not a verbal channel, I'm a written channel, which means I hear the message and it's my responsibility to write it down. And there's so many more things I could say about that. But before this all began to happen, I always knew that for me, it wasn't that I was going to be a teacher of A Course in Miracles per se. I was coming from the Holy Spirit's thought system, or I was certainly cultivating that. The mind training was certainly prevalent for me. And I was coming from the Holy Spirit's thought system, but it's not that I was going to be out there as a teacher of A Course in Miracles. And I always knew that somehow, but I didn't know, again, what that was going to look like. And so that's my journey of what I guess I could write a book or an article titled What A Course in Miracles Did for Me. Other than the fact, of course, that A Course in Miracles keeps my attention on where the Holy Spirit would like for me to have my attention, rather than where the ego would like for me to have my attention. So I just want to ask maybe if there's any questions or anything at all that coming up right now that anyone would like a little clarity on, or whatever. Maybe a comment, or I don't know, it just feels like the right time to take a little breather.
Yeah, aloha.
Aloha.
How you doing?
If I was any better, it would be against the law.
I have a question. Do you do readings?
I do readings, yes. I do personal readings, personal channels, which are highly individualized for whoever that individual is. And I really have no part in that. My only job and responsibility is to listen deeply and experience the love in my mind, because the angels come through the love in my mind. And what they said to me specifically was, just open up your mind and let us soar from our mind into yours. And so there's only one mind, but that was just the way they explained it to me. And I got it, 100% what that meant. So yeah, because as Helen Schuckman will tell you when she was channeling A Course in Miracles, the ego tries to get in there. Like the ego is constantly mobilizing its efforts against you. And so I experience that right to this day. And so I have to use a lot of discernment. And the most important part of this process is to experience the love first, because that is, the angels engage with the love in the mind. And again, I say the angels, but that's just another word for the Holy Spirit. That was what worked for me. We don't know how Holy Spirit is going to show up for each one of us, but for me, that was the way that has been given to me. And sometimes I hear the Holy Spirit. Now, don't ask me how I know it's the Holy Spirit, other than it just feels like a very soft and peaceful presence. And so sometimes I like to deliver a message from the Holy Spirit. That's not like a specific angel, if you know what I mean. It's more of a feeling of love in the mind. The Spirit comes to us in whatever way is appropriate for us, and in a way that we will recognize. Like Lloyd, for example, and I'm sure every single person here can share a different experience of how Spirit shows up for them. So I always like to say, spirits, it's coming from the Holy Spirit because you feel saved when you hear the guidance, when you hear that little soft, voiceless voice in the mind. It has such a sometimes startling message, and different from what we would normally think, that it brings a sense of delight and long-lasting relief for the mind. It's advice that is coming to us that knows what it's talking about, and it's worth getting out of the way to receive that. Like I know Lloyd receives messages sometimes in the way of symbols, and those symbols are absolutely, and I'm not speaking for you, but I've heard it so many times I can share it, I'm sure, in confidence, that these symbols come and you don't question them. You don't question the symbols. You know that they are Spirit reaching you in that way. So it's like life becomes a live stream experience of receiving guidance. And it's an amazing way to live. It's an amazing presence to wake up to. Did that answer the question, Jamuna?
Yes. I was just guided to ask because I'm interested in a reading. So I will message you later.
Absolutely. I have a sample reading that I put on Facebook yesterday that I did for a male friend of mine with permission. I shared it, and it was, again, it's highly individualized for him. And I really wanted to share it because I experienced such an amazing and profound feeling of love as I was receiving it. And that's the other beautiful work about this, or the other beautiful joy about this work. The blessing is that you receive the blessing when you're receiving the message for someone else, right? And we all experience that, I'm sure.
Something I just like to say quickly is that you have to trust what you're hearing, because sometimes it's pretty bizarre, but it always works.
Yeah, it always works. And that happened to me, actually. That brings me to an experience I had last week, and I was channeling for a lady that I didn't know. And some information came, and I didn't really know if I should share it. Now, that's happened to me lots of times. It was coming from love, and I knew that, but it was a bit like, I just thought, God, should I really share that? Is this appropriate? And many times when I share those and I take a chance, it's like I'm taking a chance and I'm trusting. Many times I've received feedback that, oh my God, like this is exactly what I needed to hear. That was the key piece that they needed. And so I've learned to trust. Not that my trust is not 100%, but you just realize that you can trust Spirit. You can trust the messages that we're receiving. Again, when they're coming from love, and you don't question that feeling of love in the mind. It's actually quite beautifully simple. Yeah. And it's very humbling because you are 100% out of the way. Like, you have to release every last modicum of all your thoughts and all your emotions in order to receive the love.
And just give you a quick example of what something happened yesterday on my school bus. One of the students said that she had found me on Facebook, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm in deep trouble now. Anyway, I said, yeah, I'm a little different. She says, she put her thumb up. She said, yeah, you're really different. But Jesus said to me when I'm talking to her, she said, tell her you've had a near-death experience. Well, I've never had a near-death experience. I've had revelation, but not a near-death. But anyway, I said, okay. And I said, you know, honey, I've had a near-death experience. And then she opened up about her grandfather and grandmother that had near-death experiences. We ended up having like a half an hour conversation. So what I'm saying is that you have to trust what you hear. I just said, okay, I'll tell her I had a near-death experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you trusted that, and she related to that because of you using that vernacular term.
Yeah.
Right.
It's funny, Lloyd, because I was thinking it happened to me. I'd be worried that she might say, "What was it? What was your experience?"
Right.
Yeah, but Kevin, you're always worried, so just what you're worried about.
Yeah. Is there anything else in particular that I love it when people ask questions, because I find that gets the ball rolling?
Hi, Stefanie. Thank you for that story so far. I really liked it when you said, what did you say? Sorry, experience the love first. But before that, you said there's a lot of discernment with that. And for me, the Course in Miracles came to me about 1.5, 2 years ago. And there's so much practical information, you know, that we can put into practice. But I think it would be nice if you could share how you discern, or what comes up for you when, what do you mean with your discernment? I was really interested in that.
Okay. So when you say discernment, are you speaking about really recognizing truth from illusion?
Well, you were using the word discernment. So for me, that sounded like, okay, is this what I'm experiencing true, or how do I make that shift? From illusion to truth, the ego, it's playing up. And how you go about that.
Absolutely. Okay. Just give me a little moment now to just be quiet for just a little moment. Well, you know, I'm going to just go back to what I mentioned earlier about when I'm channeling and listening. When I enter into a deep state of listening, I have to, and I've heard the voice for the ego, because the ego will get in there sounding like the Holy Spirit. And I've actually received channels, and they were from the ego, and I had to just rip it up, you know, just delete it, because the one thing I recognized in the information was that it wasn't love. I wasn't experiencing the love in the mind. So that's how I discern. It's the love in the mind, which is very profound and very real. And it's really, I'll tell you, the other thing about discernment is, I feel personally, it's about, I have to trust myself. That's what discernment is. I have to trust myself, because I had a friend who was also, you know, hearing some angelic voices, and she sort of kept referring to, you know, what the angels were saying. She was saying, like, I have to hear from the angels, and what are the angels saying? But really what it comes down to is that we have to trust ourselves. And discernment is really about trusting yourself. Like, what feels right here? How do I feel? I'm wondering if now would be a good time for me to share a little bit about the advanced or intense purification process I went through over the last, well, it's almost 2 years. You know how A Course in Miracles says that miracles are everybody's birthright, but purification is necessary first? Well, I went through something called the eye of the needle. I don't know if anybody here has heard about that. And so this is a very accelerated purification process that occurs during, let's call it, one of the final stages of letting go of the world. So would you like for me to share a little bit about that now? Okay.
Yes, Stephanie.
I tell you what I tell you what I'd like to do, because I actually have a little bit of literature from St. John of the Cross, who speaks about this particular phase of awakening. And I want to read, it's only a couple of paragraphs, but I feel like it really sets the tone for what I went through. And I mean, there are others that are going through this as well. And this is, you know, Lloyd and I have both discerned that part of the reason that we came together was to share. We've been helping many parts of the mind, you know, all over the world, go through this, through our own sharing of our own experience, because that's really what I like to do. I like to come right from my own experience. You know, we can talk about theory and we can talk about the course all day and all night long, but it's my experience. It's the experience that really teaches you, doesn't it? So I'm going to just share this little passage from St. John of the Cross, and then I'm just going to, you know, we'll go just take it as it comes, because I didn't make any plans here tonight. All right, so this is St. John of the Cross speaks about a key phase of the soul's awakening, which is called the eye of the needle. The eye of the needle speaks to a specific transition mind will go through. It is the recognition that no metaphysical belief structure, indeed no concept about God, can work at all. Not one foothold remains, and a whole new sphere of utter surrender of both a sense of self and one's world is occurring and cannot be stopped. The eye of the needle is not a test. It speaks to a deep and rare stage of what we could call the realization of the Christed being. Imagine a course student truly realizing what it would mean to fully forget this course and come with empty hands unto your God, not for a fleeting second, but as a permanent ground in every moment. To throw out all the mind's crutches and enter the eye of the needle, the unknown and utterly unknowable, even as the reverberations of stark disorientation strikes from soul to cell. This is just a brief attempt at a taste of the eye of the needle. As for the eye of the needle, it awaits on the other side of all all leaning on any kind of spirituality, conceptually. There, when one truly surrenders into God, utterly and truly with empty hands, with no subtle hope of gaining anything, especially not safety, knowledge, or even hope. The eye of the needle arises when ego as identity has been transcended, with only a tiny thread left, the one attached to any and all thought systems, explanations, obstructing mind's great fear, which is not knowing. Beyond all hope and hope itself, beyond all duality, these spheres obliterate it all. What remains? Only one way to find out. And no one genuinely devoted to waking and transformation will avoid the eye of the needle in right time. Coming to love only God is the very gravitational pull that ensures its inevitable arrival. And so that's a passage that was given to me by a friend of mine that really helped me understand what it was I was going through. And I have lots of other literature as well that I've actually channeled. I've done some channels about the eye of the needle, but that's all I'm going to read right now because again, this is about sharing an experience. So I had no idea. I figured, I was going along great. I was in a little bit of a comfort zone. I had my friends. I was doing my course readings every day. I would have, whatever. I kind of had a little bit of a sheltered life, let's say. And then my mom died about 2.25 years ago. And it seems like ever since my mom passed away, which, by the way, her and I developed a holy relationship before she passed away. And I feel deeply grateful for that because my mom was one of my greatest grievances in this lifetime. And I felt very challenged in relationship with her. And just before she passed away, about 3 months before, everything changed. And it was an amazing experience of transformation from specialness to holiness. And it's one of the greatest, I feel, successes for me in this lifetime. So after my mom passed away, about a month and a half after, I started to receive, in the morning I would wake up and I started to receive messages from Spirit, like lists of 3 or 4 hidden beliefs that were coming to the surface for me to look at and release. Now it was as simple as that, and no more complicated than that. It was just that, as we know, we have an immense amount of hidden beliefs, unconscious guilt in the mind, which lays dormant. And when the time is ripe, this is going to start coming up for us, because it has to come up in order for us to be free. This is really the purification that the Course talks about. And so this is the way Spirit worked with me. I would just be given little hidden beliefs. And I have, like you say, I have lists of them. And these lists of beliefs I had never considered before. Many of them were just, they would just be shown to me. And it was like, oh my God, like I never really gave that much thought. But this is a belief that I'm going to look at today. And just by Spirit giving me the list was part of the transformation, because awareness is the transformation, right? We look at it and we give it over to Holy Spirit. Now, I don't have a list of the lists right now, but that doesn't matter. For example, one of them would be your need to be loved, your need to be right, and your need to be wrong. And then again, now, okay, so this was fine. So this went on, for let's say a couple of days. And then through a series of events, I was introduced to a mighty companion who lived in Pennsylvania, and her and I were going through the same process together. So this was Holy Spirit partnering me up with another mighty companion who was going through the same thing. And we discovered this. So we would jokingly call each other on Facebook almost every day. And my friend would say, what's on your laundry list today? And I would tell her, and sometimes we have the same hidden beliefs. So it was just amazing how this was erupting. All this was happening, and we had no control over any of it. And I certainly would never have planned any of this. But Spirit knew that we were both ready for this. So I'm also using this as an example of how Spirit works in our lives, and how our program and process of awakening is so highly individualized. And so I went through this, this was a advanced, let's call it purification process, where everything was coming up. And then a couple of months went by, and I was guided to go to the Boston conference, which was a Course in Miracle International Conference. That was in 2019, I guess, 2019. So I went there, and on the last day of the conference, I found myself in a presentation. I had no idea who the presenter was. And as a matter of fact, right to this day, I still don't know the name of the presenter. None of that was important. What happened was I arrived late to the conference, and they were in the middle of doing this exercise in which you were partnered up with another individual, and they were for you the presence of innocence. And your job was to look in the eyes of the person that you were partnered up with, and take a step towards them. And every step you took towards your partner, you had to release something. And so now, the other thing that was going on was, because the ego didn't have a chance to defend itself, because I just kind of, got in the room. And then all of a sudden I was right in front of this woman who I'd never seen before, but she had the most beautiful eyes. She was the perfect witness for me. The ego didn't have a chance to defend itself. So I just sprung right into this exercise, and it was absolutely perfect. I just was an open book, an open vessel to do this. So as I was walking forward to her in my first step, I heard Spirit say, let go of your unwillingness to listen. And so I knew what that meant. And I let go right there on the spot. I could feel that leave me. I was giving it over to Spirit. And then I took another step, and Spirit said, now you're going to let go of your your disobedience. That's kind of funny. I know that word is funny, but it meant something to me. So I let go of that. And then the next one, I can't remember what the next one was, but that moment, that was a moment in time that will never be duplicated. That was the beginning of a very rapid ascension process that I would start. And by the way, it was intermittent, because you do get breaks when you're on this rapid eye of the needle process. So the next night of the Boston conference, which was the final day and everything was all clued up, I was sitting in the lobby, and who should come over and sit down next to me but Lloyd. So this was Lloyd and I. All of a sudden, Lloyd and I met. And this was a very pivotal moment in my life. Lloyd and I coming together was a very pivotal and perfect Holy Spirit guided joining. And so that was the next, so everything was accelerating. Lloyd and I were coming together to really, well, for lots of different reasons, but one of the reasons was to accelerate both of our awakening process. But I'm just going to go back again to my experience. So about, I guess, let's say 3 months later, it was about, let's say, 3 weeks before I was actually going to be moving to Ontario, because Lloyd and I met, and 4 months later, after the day we met, I moved to Ontario. We didn't waste any time. We moved in together 4 months after. We both knew, and that was that. So about 3 weeks before I left Newfoundland, I was actually dog sitting in this beautiful home downtown St. John's, and I had come home. I was out for lunch with a friend of mine, and I had come home, and all of a sudden when I walked in the house, I experienced this really strong pressure in my head. It was very intense, and I couldn't understand what it was. And I felt some fear, like I was feeling some fear and anxiety come up. So I asked Spirit, I said, what is this? And I heard the words unconscious. And I knew in that moment that this was the unconscious guilt was coming up with a vengeance into my mind. It was flooding up into the mind. This was all part of this purification process. So that was the commencement, or the beginning, I should say, of a approximately 21 day period where I was in 100% anxiety and terror. There's no other word for it other than terror. Now, I'm not saying any of this to put anybody in fear. I'm just letting you know that, we can really, and I'm not sugarcoating anything. I'm letting you know that we can really go through some very uncomfortable episodes when we're awakening. And so my days were devoted to really my own survival. Like I would wake up in the morning and I would slip into fear and anxiety, but the Spirit was working with me. And I heard the words PTSD, but actually it was described more as a post-traumatic distress disorder. This is what I had. The anxiety was so intense that I developed post-traumatic distress disorder. I couldn't really talk to anybody at this time. This was something that I had to go through on my own. And I know that might sound funny, but for me, it was something I had to do. I had to get through it on my own. I couldn't really explain it to anyone, although I did have an opportunity to explain it to a couple of people as time went by. But I really had to get through it. I had to somehow know that I could do it on my own. 2 or 3 days into it, I heard the Spirit say, the mind of God is here, and you're sliding into home base, and the ego screams the loudest when you're sliding into home base. And I knew in that moment exactly what was going on. I knew that this was part of my awakening journey. And then I heard the fear of God. So this is what was coming up for me, the fear of God, right? The outside ring of fear. I was going through what the Course in Miracles calls the outside ring of fear. Do not stop at the outside ring of fear. And a couple of things in more almost like a very practical way that got me through this was that I continued to do my daily activities every day, because I felt that doing that, and that means whether that was getting on the computer and sending an email, or doing my yoga, taking the dog for a walk, taking care of my normal routine, that was important for me, because somehow it helped me know that I could get through it. It's like it just helped me get through it instead of just laying in bed and just, that was very, very helpful for me. And the other beautiful thing was that when in the nighttime, I began to experience a peace, and so I could fall asleep and get a really good night's sleep. So the process really helped me, because I would wake up feeling refreshed. But what would happen is, as soon as I would wake up and I'd say, okay, well, maybe this is just coming to an end now, it would be like it would start again. And by the time I got to the washroom for that day, I was in full-blown anxiety. And so, this went on, by the way, this Eye of the Needle portion of awakening, this went on for intermittently for like at least a year. And it changed, and it kind of, whatever, but that was an example of a full-blown episode. I could barely get through the day, and there's no words to describe it. You kind of have to go through the experience, but I have worked with numerous individuals and only to share my experience, because when you share your experience, you somehow convey to your mighty companion that you're going to get through it, and it's going to be okay. And there's going to be an amazing light at the end of it, because it really does. And I'll tell you one thing that Spirit said to me, that my desire for peace had become 100%. That's one of the gifts that came, because, remember, our desire for peace, we could be doing A Course in Miracles for 20 years and not really have cultivated that 100% desire for peace. It's a process, and we have to be gentle with ourselves and patient with ourselves, because, the ego is trying to convince us to come back to the world, so to speak. But as David Hoffmeister says, all those things that you think you want, you don't really want them. And so going through an episode or a purification process like this really focuses the mind to go deeper into the mind of God.
And then I flew to Newfoundland to save her.
Well, and as they say in the last scene of Pretty Woman, we saved each other. Is there anything that anybody would like to share or ask, or anything at all at this point?
Yes, Stefanie, I'm interested in when you said your need to love, you need to be right, and you need to be wrong. What did you mean by need to be wrong?
That means that, we know what the need to be right means, right? Most of us, but the need to be wrong is I think it means the self-sabotage. The self-sabotage that we all find ourselves in, right? Like, I'll just share a little story about Jennifer Hadley, who was a course teacher, who said that she used to sabotage herself. The course quote that says, the ego will attack you when you're being most loving, because you're going against it. You're going against its assessment of you, and it's assessing you as unloving. So what used to happen to her was that she would go to a retreat, for example, and present and do these amazing workshops for 3 days. And then as soon as she'd get back from the workshop, she'd do something to sabotage herself. It's like the need to be wrong, right? The need to prove God wrong by all of a sudden slipping back into guilt for some reason, to sabotage ourselves. And there may be other ways of defining and explaining what that meant. But I also think it means, the need to be wrong would also mean that feeling of guilt that comes over us sometimes, right? When out of nowhere, we feel guilty for some reason. We could be driving down the street or doing something for someone, or feel that we haven't done enough for someone, or feel that, oh my God, I slipped into anger when I was having that conversation. I shouldn't have done that. And you start to feel guilty. Well, that's the need to prove yourself wrong, the need to be wrong. That's what it means for me. So I felt that was kind of startling when that hidden belief came up in the mind. I thought, that's a very wonderful hidden belief to come up. And we're only really asked to look at the hidden belief, to see the unreality in it, and to no longer believe in it, and to be willing to hand it over to the Holy Spirit, which, by the way, I did a channel 3 days ago, and Spirit was very clear that the most essential and significant part in the forgiveness process is releasing the belief, releasing the thought, handing it over, in other words, because we can theorize, and all of that is essential. Don't get me wrong. It's all important. It's essential to understand that it's my projection, that if I'm angry, it's, I put that person there to play that role, to play that dream role out for me so that I could look at it. It's all of these things are absolutely essential, but the most essential part is the willingness to actually hand it over, right? Because like a lot of times we hand it over and then we take it back. And something I've said to many people is that you know that you have let go when you're feeling joy. Because what happens in the forgiveness process is that we hand it over, and the Holy Spirit takes that thought and evaluates that thought and removes the falsity from the thought and then gives it back to you purified. And when you receive it back purified, there's a very beautiful experience of relief and release and joy in the mind. So if you're not experiencing release, it's because we haven't let it go. And that's all right, because eventually we will experience that peace. And when we experience it, it's when we want that peace 100%. We value peace, more than anything. Hi.
Hey. I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to know. You said you saw Archangel Michael. What did he look like?
Well, I didn't actually see him, Jamuna. I experienced his presence in the mind. And I'll tell you, that's actually a really cute question, or it's a cute thing that you're bringing up, because what happened to me, I was laying on my Reiki table and I was in a very beautiful feeling of peace. And Archangel Michael showed up and I did a channel, and it was a very, let's call it a very high frequency channel. And sometimes it's such a beautiful, almost an overwhelming love. And my only responsibility was to receive the channel like verbatim, word for word. And after the channel was over, Archangel Michael identified himself. And I think the reason that happened was I probably would have got overexcited if I had known it was Archangel Michael. So they waited till the end. So yes, that's what happens for me. I experience the love in my mind. I experience the love and I just take the ball and I run with it. There are other channelers that do see angels. Yeah. I'm not one of them. I mean, maybe someday I will. I have no idea. And that's the other thing, by the way. I never really did any research on angels. It's not like I was online looking at different channels. It just wasn't really something. And by the way, I'm not a poet. I've never written poetry. I've read a little bit, but I kind of felt like Jane Fonda in there was a movie she did once, and she said, I don't even like poetry. She said, I'd rather be reading my divorce papers. So it's not that I had this dangerous passion.
You kind of answered it when you were speaking, but talking about being willing to let it go. And I just had it, I don't know, I feel to share this. So this morning had the experience, I live with some children, they're not mine, and watching the 5-year-old play with 1.5-year-old and observing what I perceived as, the 5-year-old saying to the 1.5-year-old, no, you can't play with that, and snatching it off them, and watching the 1.5-year-old feel hurt. And so triggered, like it's very triggering. Absolutely. And having that moment where I was, and it absolutely disturbed my peace.
Yes.
And I'm like, what is this? I just went to my room and went quiet. And it dawned on me, the victimhood that we cling to so firmly. And it was what kind of came in was, what do you want to, because I was thinking, but I'm right, but I'm right. Like, look at what's happened. And I had that moment of, oh shit, I actually don't want to give up that notion that I'm right, that maybe I'm not right. Because you hold it for so long, don't you? You know, you really do hold it from your childhood.
Yeah,
And I guess and then I was trying to hand over, and I can feel myself kind of, you know, but so I guess what I was going to ask you was, and you, as I said, you kind of answered it. You said, I guess when you're willing, when you only want the peace of God, I guess that's when you do just go, I don't know what this is, I don't care, I just don't want this, I want that. Is that how you would describe that? Or can you offer anything?
I think you're absolutely right, exactly what you just said. And it really does come down to that. And, you know, the Course in Miracles and the different ideas and beautiful truths that we hear on a daily basis, they all help. For example, when you hear the lesson which says, my thoughts are images that I have made. So in other words, the reason our thoughts are disturbing sometimes is because of the image. It's not the thought itself, but the image, right? It's the movie and the image that makes it seem so real. And to understand that it's the movie that we're believing in. You know, like David Hoffmeister said the other day, there's nothing so blinding as perception of form.
That's it. And it's so true. Because, you know, it's almost seared into your mind, you know, even when you take it to Holy Spirit. I guess the one bit of gold that I got, there's always gold, but that made it through, was why do you... about the little girl was... And I'm emotional because I know this is for me. Why do you have to see her as vulnerable? Why can't you just see her in vulnerability?
That's very
I guess that's for me, right?
It's wonderful. That's wonderful. And, you know, thank you, by the way. The other thing I just want to say is that I know for me in my life, and believe me, I've been in many, many situations where I was believing in the image in front of me, and I was believing in the pain that was in my mind, you know, and the resistance and the hatred and all these things that come up. And we have to, you know, so beautiful to be honest about it, right? And I remember thinking, you know what, Holy Spirit, can you just help me right now? Just come into my mind. I don't care about anything other than the love that's going to save me, because the only thing that's going to save me is the love. And I know what happened with my mom, who I shared a little bit about earlier, but I was in a position where I couldn't stand my mother. Like, I actually hated her. And I knew in that moment, this is many years ago, okay? But I knew in that moment that if I did not love this individual in front of me, I wasn't going to go anywhere else on my path. I could read 1 million books, I could go to 100 seminars, and it would be all lost. And I was standing there and I said to Spirit, I said, can you please just help me? Help me, Father, help me. And in that moment, somehow I suspended all my thoughts and all my emotions, all my judgments, all of everything. And I could feel Spirit come into my mind and show me the truth about my mother. And I'm going to tell you right now, I was saved. Because Spirit said to me one time, whenever you're saved, it's God. Whenever we are saved by God. And I understand 100% what that's like. And I'll tell you something else too, you know that saying, I don't know if you've ever heard it, but it says an inside miracle will cause an outside miracle. So in other words, because I experienced a miracle in that moment, my whole life changed. Like circumstances of my life changed as a result of that one change, which is the miracle, right? And you really do have to prefer the peace, don't you, over the conflict? Because we hang on to judgment and grievances for a reason. We hang on to them because we value them. You know, like the Course says, what do you value? You know, what do you want? We hang on to judgment and pain and anger because there's pleasure in it, right? You know, the righteous indignation is like having a shot in the arm for many of us, like until we make that deep decision. There's such a deep decision that's made in the mind. And as soon as we make that decision, you know, and I just want to say, we can't make that decision before we're ready to make that decision. So I've often said to people, go easy on yourself. You might not be ready to make that decision yet, but when you do, it's like you know it. You make that deep decision in the mind, and spirit immediately accepts the invitation and really goes to work showing you your blockages, because that's what the course, that's what doing the course is. Doing this course is like having a magnifying glass up, showing you your blockages. And it's up to us to be gentle with ourselves and to be willing.
Just repeat quickly. We hang on to our grievances because why, honey?
Because we value them.
Thank you.
Yes. You know, I received a little poem one time from the angels who said, disappointment is an excuse to withhold your love. It's a grievance to be forgiven. You know, when you're feeling disappointed in someone, that's just an excuse to withhold your love. It's a grievance to be forgiven. Forgive your disappointment and realize that they were doing the best that they could. That was just a little poem that came to me one time, which I felt was, it was good for me to hear that, because I've experienced disappointment and I hung on to it. Like it was soothing me somehow, you know how we... we hang on to these false beliefs like they're soothing us somehow. Ted?
Yeah, I'm not really even sure how to ask this question. So, I mean, I've had tremendous amount of experiences, guidance, visitations, messages since I was a little kid. And I'm sitting here, and so I don't know how to ask this. Okay, so you have all this stuff happening, and a lot of the guys have stuff happening. Do you know, like, okay, were you ever given like an ultimate purpose for this particular lifetime? Like, were you told, okay, why you're doing this and what the outcome is?
Great question, but no, the answer is no. I was never given an outcome. And I got to the point where I felt so grateful for, when these angels came, not that that was any kind of a special experience. And we know that that's no kind of a special experience, but I felt all of a sudden that I was in a position where I was capable to receive these channelings, these messages, whatever that was going to mean for me in my life. And I absolutely 100% gave it over to spirit, because I had no control over what that was going to look like. Really, I can tell you that just because you're a channeler doesn't mean you're awake. And I found that, I found that out very quickly. You can receive a whole book. Okay, so let's say, I'm going to share this now because I'm actually mimicking David Hoffmeister. Okay, which. I'm just kidding, but honestly, he did share this message one time. He said, a channeler will bring through a book and his energy is at 80%, let's say. So the book is at 80% and the channeler is at 80%. But as soon as that book comes through, the channeler's energy starts to go down, simply because it's such an overwhelming experience that you have to now learn to navigate this new, let's call it energy, for lack of a better word. You have to start, navigating. Your life is changing overnight. I mean, I remember almost dropping to my knees in gratitude for this happening. But that was very quickly replaced by a sense of, I felt despondent. I felt lost. I felt out of balance. I felt, well, what now? So my energy started to dip and I had to find a new equilibrium. There was a movie I watched one time which said, sometimes we have to lose our balance in order to gain new balance. But I will say, Ted, from my own experience of what you're saying, and I have had that question many, many times. I've asked God, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing here? I feel like I'm doing the work. I feel like I'm doing the forgiveness. I feel like I've gone through a lot. I feel like I'm committed on my path. But what am I supposed to do? What is that supposed to look like? But for me, what I did, I just entered a period every day where I would get silent, because I had done a lot of reading. and I had done a lot of videos. I had done a lot of watching videos and everything. And then it was time for me to enter a period of silence. And it was through the silence. And let me just share something that the angels said. They said, it was in those moments that you receded and opened to our loveliness afoot. Those were the moments. We don't realize how powerful the moments are that we give to God, to just be with God. A Course in Miracles talks about that, doesn't it? I don't know where it is. I think it's in the teacher's manual, maybe. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm far from a scholar of Course in Miracles. That's Miss Lloyd's job. But in it, it does say to take time every day to spend with God. Well, I started taking that very seriously. I would get up and I would have no other goal except to give it over to God. Let my mind become one with God's mind. So in deep humility, I began to do that. And I can tell you that as soon as you do that, I'll tell you something what else they said to me. They said, when you begin to see yourself like we see you, that's when the streamers stream across the universe and the party starts. So they have a lot of humor as well. They're very humorous. So, and there's so many other messages and poems. I just became absolutely filled to the brim.
They are very funny. And the reason why I ask is there was a point in time where I had this awakening with Jesus, and he took me home. That's all I can say. And he told me, he said, you don't have to do this anymore. Like this, you don't have to do this, and we can go home, and your brothers can come with you. And I go through sort of, I don't know. I mean, I understand because I saw what it meant, but I have no idea how it happens. But I do know, like it's like all preparation to end the fear of God so we can finally get home. And we can't do this alone. And I just feel like I get given, like, guys like you and everybody here to join with, and together we're not going to have to do this anymore. And it is about forgiveness in a certain sense, but there's a recognition there that comes too. And I don't get, like, I know people, they get you get long messages. People write stuff like Helen got the Course. This happened to me before I got the Course. And then when the Course was handed to me, it was as if, these are the guidelines that I needed to know what to do with myself. Because after I woke up, I had no idea what to do with myself. Like I didn't know everything was different. So it's just sort of interesting that in this journey, meeting people who are like, same sort of being readied themselves by eliminating the fear of reality and coming together and sharing our, like in the 12-step program, they say you share your strengths, hope, and recovery. And in that sense, it's almost the same thing. It's like we're sharing our strengths, the hopes that we have, and the process of recovery to identify with each other. So I've never asked it. I've never even been given to ask this question of another person till just now, which is sort of interesting. So I don't know, but it's very cool to know the validation for me is important too. Like when I get a message, the validation that it's a true message, and it always comes true, and then things always happen the way they say, even though I don't understand it until it's almost, it all comes together and it happens. Yeah. So it's just sort of an interesting proposition. Yeah. So thank you.
Yes, that's a very good point. And again, for me, it just came back down to, I'll tell you, if I could describe it in one word. Now, this is not very exciting to the ego, okay? But the word is silence. truly, silence.
And the thing is, we all have an individual curriculum.
Right.
And, you know, the Holy Spirit takes our own individual talents in the dream
Right.
and uses them. That's, you know, what I've learned over, you know, a period of time. Each one of us has certain talents, and the Holy Spirit will use them where it sees fit. And you just have to be open to it.
And we, you know, we even have to give up the idea of what my talent is.
Yeah.
It's like we have to give up every single thing we thought we knew about ourselves in a very experiential way. And again, that's something that I really cultivated. You know, something in me knew that was the way for me, in terms of, I just knew that I wanted to be an instrument of peace. That was the one thing I knew. It's just to give everything up that we have to give everything up that we thought we knew about ourselves. And specialness. I'll tell you, specialness is the biggest thing. When I was going through, remember I mentioned the Eye of the Needle, the 2-year purification process, which by the way, I haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg. I could talk unendingly for 7 days straight about it. But one thing that I was unraveling in a very accelerated and painful way was specialness. And some specialness, you can't even articulate it, but you feel it. You know, whenever you're triggered, there's a very good chance that there's some specialness that's coming up. It's to be unraveled. And you just give it up to the Holy Spirit, give it up to God, and I would just keep letting it be exposed. This is being exposed now. It's painful. Yes, it's painful, but I'm ready now. It wasn't really for me to do anything. It's just me being willing to really let it be exposed and to feel the pain of it and to trust that Spirit knew what he was doing. It's in the exposure of it. By the way, the exposure of it is the transformation of it. It's not about thinking our way through this or analyzing our way or anything else. It's just about being willing to go through the experience of having our identity, you know, the idea of our individual selves and whatever that may mean for us, letting it be exposed, our insecurities, you know, our fears, the feeling of guilt, feeling of hatred, the feeling of pride. You know, pride is a big one. You know, anytime I feel triggered now, I just let it come up. And I recognize that this is coming up for purification. And it's all right. Two things that I recognized. The number one important thing for me as I began this journey was self-gentleness. You know, be gentle with yourself. You don't have to beat yourself up. I began to become very gentle with myself. And then the other one was honesty. You know, it's, some of these now are the teachers of God, the characteristics of a teacher of God. Honesty with myself about how I was feeling. I know the Course talks about honesty and consistency, where, you know, and I know that most of you guys have read that, you know, it's more of consistency. But for me, it really was about me. I have to be honest now. How am I feeling here? What's really going on here? What's my motivation here? For example, am I trying to make myself look good, for example? Am I wearing a mask? No pun intended. But, you know, do I have a persona? Am I wearing some kind of a persona that's not really true about myself, right? So I started to look at all these little things. There's a section in the Course I highly recommend. It's one of my favorites. It's called The Healed Relationship. And when I had a special relationship with my daughter, and unraveling that was very painful. And I didn't even know I had a special relationship with her until someone pointed it out to me, you know, several years ago now. But I read this section in A Course in Miracles called The Healed Relationship, and it absolutely put me on my knees in terms of what I had to do. So basically what I did was I gave that relationship up to the Holy Spirit. And he worked with me with that relationship. And now I would call it a holy relationship.
Stefanie, how did you recognize that it was a special relationship? What did you see?
I would feel pain. Oh, that's a great question, by the way. I found that, okay, I gotta sort of just feel into this for a moment. How did I know it was a special relationship? I felt that I needed something from her. That would be the best way.
Expectation.
Yeah. I felt I needed something. I needed validation somehow from her. Yeah, expectation. But that would be the big way of explaining it. I felt that I needed something from her. And now I don't need anything from her. And we're free. And now we have a really loving, fun, light, supportive, nurturing relationship. Because I don't need anything from her anymore. Because I faced that. That's kind of a short answer, but you get the drift.
No, that was perfect. Even
Right.
I felt the answer with just that you felt pain. That was like enough.
And I just want to share something that was really impactful for me. I was at a conference and Deirdre Wolsack was the presenter, and he said that anytime you need anything from anybody, you have entered into a state of suffering. And that was very profound for me.
That's a good one.
Yeah, because I knew that I was like that with her. And I had to heal that relationship. That was another part of this life's curriculum, let's say. My mother, my daughter, and many others as well. But they were some of the more primary. By the way, Spirit or the angels said to me one time that every person, let's say, has one primary forgiveness opportunity in each lifetime. Annie is laughing. And we usually know what that is. Each soul or each part of the mind, we know what that primary forgiveness opportunity is. And we have the capacity to do it. And when we do it, like when we achieve that and heal that primary forgiveness opportunity, we will really be in a great state of grace and peace. But I think all we really need to know is that if it's given to us, we can do it. We have the tools in us to do it.
I have a question regarding that, because I feel like I've had so many primary moments of needed forgiveness. Like, if each one is huge for me. Each one has been huge for me, and they just keep coming. They keep on coming, and I think, oh wow, I've done that one.
Yeah.
And then sometimes I pick it up again. But yeah, I don't really understand what you mean by that, because they just keep on coming for me.
I hear you, and I'd like to share something if you'd let me, if I can.
Sure.
2 things I'd like to share. One is that I was having major issues with my daughter, and I've had lots of major issues with lots of different things in my lifetime. But let me just kind of get down to one example. You said that it keeps coming up over and over and over again. Spirit said to me one time, when that happens, it's because it's very simple. You haven't completed your forgiveness lesson. Trials are but lessons presented once again. Whereas before I made a faulty choice, I get to choose again, right? So it's just that we haven't, when something keeps coming up over and over and over again, we also have to understand that, we're carrying patterns from other lifetimes, and we don't even know where they're coming from. We know they feel very strong, and they're very repetitive. And the feelings and emotions and hidden beliefs that are coming up are very painful, and they feel very deeply embedded. And that's why we have to be gentle with ourselves. Like the angel said to me one time, they said, many of the hidden beliefs that you're letting go of are deeply embedded. And so therefore, just do the best you can every day. And eventually you will be free. You will be free. But, mandatory, what is it? Repetition is mandatory. It's not only favorable, it's mandatory. Just keep doing it.
It's not only necessary, but mandatory.
Thank you.
I just want to say, special relationships, one of the greatest things in special relationships is they all have trade-offs. In other words, if you do this for me, I'll do this for you.
Right.
There's always some kind of a trade-off in a special relationship.
Right. That's very good. And the other characteristic of a special relationship, I will say, is that you really want to use guilt as a motivator. Do you know what I mean? Like, you just want to be able to somehow use guilt. But I learned that anytime I'm using guilt, and not that I don't do it anymore, I can honestly say I don't, but when I did, I began to train the mind to take back the guilt tentacle. Am I using guilt somehow, or even subtly, am I somehow trying to motivate that person through guilt? And by the way, as we know, guilt can show up through loving gestures, you know? So it's like it's like I had to ask myself, am I using guilt somehow? Is there an underscore of guilt motivating or trying to somehow turn someone around to my way of thinking? And I had to stop doing that. I had to say, no, I'm going to remove that guilt tentacle. I'm not going to do this anymore because I don't want this anymore. I'm making another choice now. I need to forgive this now. And so this is the step-by-step, moment-by-moment process that we enter into when we make a choice really to wake up. And for me, it was never about wanting to wake up. It was about wanting to experience the miracle, which is another way of saying peace. So I hope that offered some clarity on that. Oh, and can I just share one other thing? I know I keep asking that, but I guess it's okay. But Sarah, I just wanted to say, you know how you said something was coming up over and over and over again? Well, I was standing in the porch putting my shoes on one day, upset over something about my daughter. I don't even remember what it was, but I felt really overwhelmed, and I felt like my whole life everything was out of control. Have you ever had that feeling of just, I don't have any control over anything? And that was really strong in my mind. And I said to Spirit, I said, why am I going through this? Like, why? And the answer was, would you really want it any other way? And the answer was no, I really wouldn't want it any other way because I want to wake up. I'm very stubborn, but I want to wake up.
Clive, you had a question?
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, it's not so much a question. It was just really appreciating what Stefanie was saying about the guilt tentacle. And that just completely overwhelmed me a number of years back, where that's exactly what I was being made so present for me, was so much of when I spoke, and it usually was with my wife, there was this, infusion of guilt attached to it. And when you start to see it, the more you see it, and it just keep letting it go. And your description of a guilt tentacle is perfect. It really is. It just kind of suctions on, and then it's just and it's so yucky and sticky, and you reminded me of when my first marriage. This weird thing would happen was, whenever I'd see a good-looking woman, I'd go, wow, that's a good-looking woman. And then I go, oh, shit, I'm married. And I immediately feel guilty for that. And the weirdest thing, within 5 minutes, I would stub my toe, hit my head, slam my elbow. The pain feedback on that moment of guilt, it was just got to be ludicrous at some point. I just had to laugh at myself. It's like, okay, I'm giving all of this over because clearly this guilt got too much pain attached to it. And as soon as I started laughing at it, it just kind of unraveled and went away. And the other thing I was going to ask you, Stefanie, but you actually answered it when you were speaking, was that I was going to ask you, did you find, as you were feeling the pain and the emotions unraveling, did you find a place where you could extend kindness and gentleness to yourself? And clearly you did. And I want to underline that because, as I said last week, that just seems to be such a huge missing piece for people when they're having the pain of emotion and the confusion. It's the opportunity for the tenderness you can extend to yourself in those moments is immeasurable. And the metaphor I keep offering my friends, they will call me from all different places, and I just say, we get so freaking logical in our minds about what we're attempting to do, and we lay that trip on ourselves. And as I tell them, if you're not speaking to yourself like you're 5 years old, you're way too heady. And all that little emotional upset wants is to be recognized and know that it's okay. And somehow for me in this dynamic, in that moment of just saying, I'm here, I love you, it's okay, creates an opening of opportunity to hand it over. That's the best I can describe it. So you really touched me when you were mentioning, again, that discovery of kindness and gentleness to yourself through the process. I wanted to say that.
Thank you. Yeah, I just made a decision. I thought, I can't beat myself up. That's not serving me. And that wasn't like a mental realization. It was more of an experiential. It was like, I need to be gentle with myself here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much opportunity for that, especially right now, because things seem to be moving so fast, and the stimulus response mechanism that Teddy addressed last week again. Oh, and I had to say one more thing. I get huge downloads and messages, but they're usually from Teddy on Facebook. In answer to your question, Teddy, there you go.
Well, from my perspective right here on my screen, Teddy is above you, so he must be your angel.
From
Good
my
one,
perspective, Teddy just ran out of the screen when I said that.
No, it's like, that's all I tell everybody is just think of me as a lesson in forgiveness, and we'll all get home.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just very quickly, you know how I like to be answered. I heard the concept. Could you give me one or two quick examples on the guilt thing, how you say that people work with the guilt? I understand the words, but what does that look like? Give me one example, maybe two quick ones.
You mean about what we were just talking about, the guilt tentacles?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'm going to give you an example that you can use for yourself. If you're
Yes.
let's say you're having a conversation with anybody at any time, and all of a sudden you feel this feeling in your mind that you want to somehow control their behavior, no, not control, that's not the right word, influence them somehow by using guilt. And when we're in touch with ourselves, we really know what we're doing. It's like we really get in touch with our motivations. It's to be looking at what our motivation is and to be asking ourselves, why am I doing this? So it's like to be asking yourself, even before you open your mouth, like, why am I saying this? And you know when you're coming from that idea of, like I talked before about the guilt tentacle, you kind of know when you're attempting to motivate someone through guilt. And it's to actually stop yourself in your own tracks and just prefer something else, make another choice, or just release it in the moment. Let me give you a little example of what happened to me one time. And I'm going to use judgment as the example because it's all the same, right? If it's not fear, if it's not love, it's fear or a derivative of fear. So I'm going to use judgment because this is just an example that's coming to my mind. I was driving down the road one day and a friend of mine was coming into my mind, and I felt like I was really judging her in my mind, and I caught myself doing that. It's like, I'm judging her, and I mean, I was really judging her harshly. This is when I lived in Newfoundland, by the way. So in that moment, I just stopped myself in my tracks, and I said, I don't want this anymore. I do not believe in this anymore. I don't believe in judgment anymore, and I'm ready now. I need to let this go right now in this moment. And it was beyond those words. It was the motivation, right? I had the motivation behind it to free myself from this. It was time for me to hand it over, and I just did it. I just put it up, and I gave it over to Holy Spirit. And I know I was successful in doing that because I felt joy. I felt release. I felt love, right? It's not my task to...
But where was the guilt in that, Steffi? Where was the guilt?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm using judgment instead of guilt, but you can use guilt.
Oh.
Right? You can use guilt. And
I just don't have, I just can't connect it in my mind.
Okay,
Can we make it a bit more personal?
let's just say you're speaking with one of your children, okay? And I'm going to use you as an example, just like as kind of a generic example. You're there and you're speaking with one of your children and you're feeling agitated, or you're feeling, whatever. You're just feeling resentful somehow. And so you're just there, and maybe you're feeling like you want to sort of lash out at someone in some way. Well, that motivation is guilt, because really what you're trying to do in that moment is make someone else feel guilty. It's like anger, for example. Like A Course in Miracles says that anger is nothing more than an attempt to make someone feel guilty.
Okay.
So anytime you feel anger towards someone, you're actually attempting to make them feel guilty.
Yeah, I get that. Okay.
Yeah. And so it's just recognizing what's going on. We have to get to the guilt beneath it and just make a decision in the moment. It's that simple for me. It's like, I just don't want this anymore. It's a decision as to, I don't want this anymore. And it's just a willingness to release it to Spirit so He can replace it with love, and He will. Because remember before when I said, when you give it over, immediately the Holy Spirit takes that thought, He evaluates it, He removes the falsity from it, and He gives it back to you purified. But our only job is to actually give it over. Because if we haven't given it over, we're still going to be entertaining it in the mind. Right?
Yeah.
So in other words, we're still going to have the motivation of causing guilt and influencing someone. Like whenever you feel angry, it's really because you're trying to make someone else feel guilty. And I know that can sound harsh because we've all experienced anger. But
oh yeah, last weekend, house full of kids.
Yeah.
Lisa, you could say anytime you really think anything should be different in the world and you're having some sort of response to it, like that can be anything with anyone, and you're having some sort of response, it should be different, basically, whether that's with your children or anything, and you'll feel the upset, like Steffi said, it might be disappointment because there's an expectation. You have an identity wrapped up, that your child should love you somehow. So you'll have some form of upset there, and you'll say something to them that somehow they should be doing something differently. It could be just might not seem anything to you, but it could be just as subtle as, oh, you could have come over to have lunch with me.
Right.
Please come home more often. Please come home more often.
Yeah. So it will come out in everything here, basically, because, we're having special relationships with everything here until our mind's really purified.
Yes. And the egoic thought system, remember that the egoic thought system runs on guilt. Guilt, sin, and fear. And we know originally where that comes from, which I don't necessarily have to get into that right now in terms of metaphysics of it. But when we understand our motivation, like you say, of guilt, we don't understand how much it runs us, is really what I'm attempting to say here, until we do. Right? We don't understand how much guilt runs us until we do understand. And then we can work with it and really notice it when it erupts. And again, be gentle with it, not be harsh on ourselves. We're not noticing it in order to blame ourselves. We're noticing it in order to lovingly release it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you kind of have to train yourself to be gentle with yourself, I find.
One of my greatest motivations is a principle in the Course that says, and it's a literal statement, it says you judge only yourself and you forgive only yourself.
Right.
And I just carry that with me all the time.
Yes. Well, like Gary says in his book, your brother is a symbolic representation showing you to yourself. And whenever we make someone feel guilty, or whenever we say something about somebody else, we're really sending a message back to the unconscious mind. And a couple of weeks or maybe 2 hours later, we're going to feel the same. Right? Because we're sending that message back to the unconscious mind. And that's why when we're saying something about or to someone else, or having an experience or a feeling or a reaction about another individual, we're really having it about ourselves.
It's only because there's only one
One mind.
unconscious mind appearing here as many.
Right. I'm getting it, you know. Well, I've been listening to Lloyd for like, how long has it been now, darling?
Couple of years.
Almost 2 years. So I'm going to be getting it. I have no choice.
If I could just say a couple of things with what you were asking, it can be as subtle with, and you can do it with your children, you can do it with your significant other, doesn't matter. But there's that funny little statement, if you really loved me, you would fill in the blank. And that's that tentacle. That's the great representation of the tentacle. And it's all based on exchange. That's where the specialness is. It's like, I'll do for you, you'll do for me. I've done so much for you. Why don't you do more for me? And it's just, you're so trapped in that dynamic. And I watch mothers with their children do it. You know, I get, you know, that funny line, I gave you the best years of my life. It can apply to your kids or to your husband or your wife. It doesn't matter. But it's still the stickiness of that tentacle. Although I did just realize it's not like a guilt tentacle for me when I kept slamming my toe. It's more like a guilt testicle. But that's a different story. Okay.
And can I just say as well that, you know, it's about unraveling specialness. And it can be excruciating. We hold dearly to our specialness, I learned through experience. We hold dearly to it. We wear these personas, right? We're trying to protect ourselves from a very young age. I'll just use this lifetime as an example, but that's what we do. We're wearing personas. We're protecting ourselves. And once the mask starts to come off and it all starts, and our specialness starts to unravel, it's like it can be a really excruciating experience.
You're talking about special relationships with seeming loved ones, but it's no different, is it, to if I see someone, for instance, that I think is a perpetrator, or even in the news, and I think they're guilty. It's the same, isn't it? And it's me projecting my guilt onto them.
Right.
Yeah.
So were you there for the meditation on Monday with Kate?
Fucking hell. Like, amazing. And I felt a shift like never before. Yeah, it was really helpful.
Yeah, we did really good meditation. Kate facilitated us through on perceiving being unfairly treated, and that can apply to us personally, or whether we see it out in the world where you feel like you need to defend someone in the world because they're being unfairly treated.
Funny,
yeah, I do. It's on my YouTube channel, and anyone who wants the link, just let me know in the chat box.
I was going to say, it's funny that when she started that, I was like, I don't feel overly unfairly treated. So in the meditation, I kind of was like, oh, all right, I can go with my dad and, you know, the man in my life. And then and it was an amazing experience. But then as the weeks unfolded, right, like levels, layers, little bits more amazing.
Did you have a question?
Hi, I just want to thank you so much, Stefanie and Lloyd, for being here. And to also just say that I'm very special. I really am so special in so many ways. And I am really aware of my specialness. I'm more special than any of you. And I'm really, I love what you're talking about, training myself to be gentle. I'm very, very slow at this training. If it was obvious physically how much I bash myself up and whatever, I would barely be standing. I would be so bruised and battered, and, you know, I am just forever. And it's what I need to do is I'm really having a hard time. I'm so aware of it all. I'm aware that I need to hand things over, and I feel like I do, but I'm not, obviously. I'm just still, because they do keep coming back. The same stuff is coming back over and over and over again. And I guess I am very grateful for the fact that I'm aware of this.
Yes.
I know exactly what's happening. I know where I'm at, you know.
Yeah.
And I guess what I need to do is somehow finally say, okay, it is okay to be where you're at, and accept that for God's sake, and then try, instead of like, I just keep feeling this guilt all the time that, I've still got this to hand over, I've still got that to release. Yeah, I guess it's the tentacles. They're just so, the suction is so strong. And, there's just so much said that I really love. Yeah, anyway, I don't know what else to say, but I'm just very grateful for it just highlighting it all a bit more for me this morning. So thank you very much.
You know, I want to thank you for just letting it all out and probably articulating the feelings that we've all either felt or feel or will feel. And that's what it's all about. You know, what comes to me when you're speaking is that trust the process, because your desire for peace is purifying. You can rest assured it will get more and more, like the desire will accelerate more and more. You can trust this process 100%.
I always say the Holy Spirit earns your trust. It's not the other way around.
Right.
It's true.
You got your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that last share, and also Stephanie and what you just said. Just trust the process. For some reason, there's no
Your connection's really bad. I can't really hear any of that.
You can't hear me?
It's really breaking.
All right, I'll just change rooms. Just going to another room.
I think that's a great metaphor when things get crazy. Just go to another room.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yes.
Is that okay, guys? Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting because I was all comfy. Now I'm not comfortable, and that's perfect. So, yes. So about 4:45 in the morning this morning, I was asleep. You know, very, very much asleep in bed, and I've had many years of challenge with sleeping at night, and there's been some improvements. By the way, I've been dedicated to this teaching for about 6 years, and just it's my life. I want the peace of God, so I'm doing everything I can to, you know, undo the old stories. And there seems to have been a story around kind of invasion of my privacy, which began with my father, and as well as that, there was a lot of judgment and criticism from that primary carer, which I can see. You know, I absorbed as a child and formed a story around, and then hence seemed to create my reality with certain situations. Anyway, there's a neighbour, and she's had an unwanted guest and has asked him to leave, and he's kept coming back. And we share a driveway, so when he does come around, he's very loud. He's been troubled with addictions and things like that, and his personality is extremely it's very loud, and he's not sensitive to the noise he makes or the things that he does and how that can affect others. And he turned up at 4:45 this morning, was on the driveway, woke up the whole house. Then the cats were like, you know, really alive and active and running around the house for a couple of hours, and I felt very disturbed, and I'm just tried to apply the teachings. Kate Greaves is a really strong teacher for me. So she, you know, some of the things that she suggested I do, I've been applying and sort of handing it over, and also saying sort of yes. There's been a teaching I've come across recently, which is about just saying yes to everything. So I was practicing that, but at the same time, just, you know, even now, just feeling really, really sort of sick and tired and upset, and I just would love your take on that, Stefanie, or anyone in the group. What you do in a moment where, you know, this sort of thing comes up, and it's come up before many times. Someone mentioned earlier in the meeting about forgiveness lessons, just they keep coming up over and over again, and that there was just one primary forgiveness, you know, one primary forgiveness opportunity in each lifetime. And what I got from that was, oh, it's, you know, seemingly my dad, and then all the others are just like the ends of the tentacles of that particular lesson. It's not that there's heaps of people giving me forgiveness lessons. It's actually one primary forgiveness lesson, which seemed to originate with my dad, but of course originated in me, in my mind. So I'm just wondering if, you know, because everything is in the mind, everything that seems to happen, and the grievances that come up are projections from the mind, if, you know, it does feel like I'm constantly doing something that's not right because this keeps happening. And your words, Stefanie, that look, just stick with this. If you really do want the peace of God, and you keep doing the work, then it will sort itself out. And I need to hear that, because I just feel just overwhelmed and just lost, and I just feel like crying all the time, and it's too hard. So there you go. Thank you.
I hear you, because I've had all those feelings. You know, I've had those feelings of feeling lost. I'm feeling threatened. I'm feeling afraid. Just feeling absolutely, you know. And I think a big part of this is just to be really honest about how you feel. Let's just close our eyes just for just a moment. Just take a little beat.
Jesus just gave me a message. He said you should buy a gun. I'm just kidding.
Do you know, I have had images of that, you know, in the westerns, all those American movies, when the guy comes out with his shotgun.
You got to throw some humor in here.
That's right. Keeping in mind it's a murderous thought system.
Yeah.
And when this stuff comes up, right, and the images that we can conjure up in our mind, I mean, it's a murderous thought system.
Yes.
So to understand that.
You can always kill now and forgive later, too.
Yes, we're right. Poppy said, and then I think Ted and Lloyd should answer this question. But I'll just say a little bit first. You know, again, coming from my own experience, but can we just be still just for a little moment?
Yeah.
Let's just take a little beat and maybe just close our eyes just for a moment. Yeah, well, I think what comes to me is that this is an opportunity for you to get in touch with the murderous thought system. And, you know, there are many tools of forgiveness, I'll say, out there. But one that came to me was that I used, and Spirit helped me use this tool, was it was just a process of identifying your false beliefs and your hidden beliefs. And so what I would do was feel the feeling, and then just ask myself, what hidden belief is coming up here? So really get in touch with the murderous rage, for example, that you feel, and say, well, what does this say about me? What is the hidden belief that's coming up? And you can turn that hidden belief into a statement by saying something like, I believe I am fill in the blank, whatever that means for you. And the more honest, we can get in doing this process, the better off we are. So you could say, okay, I'm feeling this murderous rage right now, and to get right into the feeling of it, and then to say, what does this say about me? I believe I am. So do you think that right now you could come up with a word that you could fill in that blank? Like from your experience last night, you can say you're keeping in mind that you're identifying a hidden belief, and to
Yes.
say, yeah, I believe I am what?
Okay, so it's sort of like coming from a feeling that I have right now with this thing happening. So I believe I am hard done by.
That's very good. Very good. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to go a little bit deeper than that. Being hurt, if you're hard done by, what does that say about you? Like to really get into the feeling and of what that fear or that rage or that whatever that's coming up, anger, feeling of losing control, whatever. What does that say about me? I believe I am
A victim.
good. And do you want to
I
go?
believe I am separate.
Yes. Yeah. Anything else?
I believe I am unloved.
Yes.
And unworthy.
Right.
Of, unworthy or like I believe I am a failure.
Yes. This is really great. Just keep going for as long as you want.
I believe I am invisible.
Yes.
I believe that I don't matter.
Good. That's a big one. All right. So this is really good that you had the courage to just go there and just say these things and experience this and expose this in the moment. It's powerful. Thank you for getting in touch with that for all of us.
And we have to get to the point where we know all of those beliefs are false.
Right. Which brings me to my next thing. And Lloyd just said it. As we know, when we're feeling these feelings, this is ego, right?
Yeah.
Ego is making us feel this. It's really, I'm just going to put it like that. The ego is making us believe this about ourselves. But as we know from doing A Course in Miracles, the ego is not real. It's not really true. And so the next step, I just want to bring you through this. The next step is to identify and say, I believe this about myself, but it's not really true. It's an illusion. It's not the truth about me. It's just a belief that I'm holding in the mind. So let's bring it back now, and we can say, this is not the truth.
This is not the truth.
Very good. And
I
so
believed this about myself, but it's not who I am.
And the next step is to forgive it, because I can only forgive what I recognize to be not true. I can only forgive it if I recognize its unreality, right? I can't forgive it if I believe it to be real.
Yeah.
But in recognizing the unreality of it, I can easily let it go. And so would you like to take that step?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
I can recognize the unreality of these beliefs. And in doing so, I can let it go. I give it to you, Holy Spirit.
Thank you.
It's beautiful. I just want to say one other thing, that sometimes It's not necessarily being passive in the dream. If you have an issue that needs to be dealt with, sometimes you have to face it.
Yes.
But you face it not with anger. You face it with love, with the Holy Spirit holding your hand.
Yes.
But sometimes situations in our life have to be dealt with.
Yeah, with that understanding. Yeah, but the main thing is what the agenda is in doing something, in action, in form. The agenda, is it love or is it fear?
Very
And
important.
Just to undo those old stories it's really what it's all about, isn't it? Undoing the old stories and asking Holy Spirit to show me how to see it differently. So just a constant conversation with Holy Spirit, and just to keep trusting that. And that's why it's important to come together like this. It's like a pit stop for me. Just, yep, okay. Just to listen to the truth.
Right. It reinforces the truth in the mind. And you know what Lloyd was saying, I was actually going to say that about it's okay to do certain things on the level of form that we need to do. I mean, you can love someone. I say this jokingly sometimes, but you can love someone and then go call the police on them if you have to. It's not about behavior. It's about what's going on in the mind, which is where the healing is happening. And I just want to say, with that process that I just brought you through there a little bit, that's really about recognizing that what you believe is not true. Because you can only really release it by understanding that it's not the truth. You don't make it real. Forgiveness is what is it? Forgive my brother for what he has not done. Those beliefs we carry about ourselves are not the truth about us. And when we can really accept that, understanding that they are ego ideas, well, then it's easy to forgive. But you may have to do it 20 times. The Spirit worked with me one time when I was all of a sudden began to release a lot of hidden beliefs. This was another episode or another portion of my life that I was doing that. But Spirit said, feel the feeling and do the track. In other words, let the feeling come up and then run it through that track that I just went through with you. The track being those few steps. So that's the advice I got from Spirit. Feel the feeling. Have the courage to feel the feeling and then run it through those steps and do the forgiveness work.
Almost like what Byron Katie does.
Right.
Is it true?
And were you just shown this, Stefanie, or does it have a certain name, this particular process?
Well, I call it the freedom process. It's not mine. I didn't dream it up or anything. I worked with a man down in Costa Rica. His name is Deirdre Wolsack.
6 Steps to Freedom.
Yeah, and I've condensed them down because you don't really need them all at the beginning. Yeah, but in the end, it's just about recognizing it. And yeah, so I've boiled it down to 3 steps. Don't tell Deirdre, though.
It's perfect. This is just a Holy Spirit given gift to me today. Thank you. That shortened version is perfect for me right now. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also did want to say thank you. I think it was Clive who was speaking earlier about speaking to that kind of 5-year-old, the one who needs to know that everything's okay. And I feel that work is very, very powerful, and I've been doing that for a long time. And yeah, we don't want to deny our feelings. There's a part of the mind that is screaming to be heard, and just to take that action as the sort of the compassionate one who's aware and can be there and hold that part of the mind that is afraid and say, it's okay, and I'm here and I'm not abandoning you. Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate it.
Stefanie, I was going to ask, with those sort of beliefs, there might be, the unworthiness belief. Did you find with this sort of process like that might come up again? So it's a bit like Jesus says in the Bible, 70 times 7, forgive 70 times 7 or whatever, because some of those are so strongly held in the mind. It's kind of washing it over and over and over again, in a sense, before it was really taken out entirely.
Absolutely, 100%. I often say persist, persist, persist. Do it as many times as you feel necessary, because some of the times that we do it will just be perfunctory. They won't really be real, if you know what I mean. We won't really be letting go, but we're just going through the process. That's all right. It's all part of it. The whole point, I think, is to be gentle with yourself no matter what. because we all reach a point where we just can't hold on to it any longer. We just really get to the point where we decide to let go of it. Yeah, I think it's all wonderful. And I know in my experience, I went through all kinds of different forgiveness techniques. I've done, you name them, and I've done them. You know, Maria Felipe, Deirdre Wolsack, Gary Renard, I've tried them all on for size, and they all work. And we can use different ones for different times in our lives, or use ones for different kinds of beliefs, for example. Yeah. If you want a complete list of all those hidden beliefs that Spirit gave me, they're on my Facebook page. I don't know if you want to maybe have a look at them. There's a list of about 30 different hidden beliefs that I shared on my Facebook. If anyone wants to follow me or become my friend or whatever, feel free.
You're already my friend, Stefanie.
Oh, wonderful.
And I love your simplicity. I want to just really underline the simplicity of that. And there was a piece in there. Oh, yeah. I watch how our minds constantly want to, that idea of this is not it. I've forgiven it so many times, and this is definitely not it. And it's as simple as the shift from this is not it to this is it. This is the thing that needs to be forgiven. It doesn't matter how many times it needs to be forgiven. And one question you can really catch yourself with was, if it wasn't this, what would the next thing be? Because it's going to be something, because this is what I signed up for, the forgiveness of the world. So it doesn't matter. I remember somebody gave me a book in 75. It's called A Lazy Man's Way to Enlightenment.
Yes.
And it appealed to me. That title, that was for me. Let me tell you, after all the complex stuff I'd been trying to do, a book titled The Lazy Man's Way to Enlightenment, that was all for me. And I think it was Thaddeus Goldman. But anyways, he'd gone on a trip or something. It was, an acid trip, and it was very horrendous to him. And the voice came to him and said, "What do you think needs to be loved?" And he got it in that moment. That was whatever was coming up, that's what needed to be loved. And it doesn't matter if the relationship with your father and you need to forgive him 70 times 7, like Annie just said. Once that's healed, there's going to be a beautiful space for the next healing, and the next healing, and the next healing. So you might as well enjoy the practice of forgiveness. What do you think needs to be loved? That part of your mind. That's it. I'm sorry to be so simple, but that's it.
That is it.
That's why the Course says forgiveness is our only function. Only function.
I hear you, Lloyd. That is 100%, man.
Yeah.
Now, I know we've been talking for a long time, but do you want me to sort of end off, Annie, with a list? I'm gonna get it up here now. I got my phone here. I can read a list. Maybe it might be helpful. I'm just going to read a list of all the hidden beliefs that came up. It might be a little bit of icing on the cake, so to speak. All right, I got to find it first. All right, no problem. I'll run through them right now because, like you said, it was such a significant time for me. And it's not that far down, so just bear with me for a moment. Okay, so again, this was the process that I went through, and these were some of the hidden beliefs that were coming up to me and given to me by Spirit. So these weren't beliefs that were just that I was conjuring up, if you know what I mean. They were given to me. Okay, number 1, belief in the loss of innocence, pain of survival, the need to be right, the need to be wrong, the need to be a fixer, the need to be a cleaner, the need to be a wholeness blocker, the need for anything other than divine love. And then I heard another sentence which said, the belief in loss is really the belief in the loss of heaven, which we cannot lose. And then another set of beliefs, hidden beliefs, the need to be released, the need to be loved, the need to be attractive, the need to be seen, heard, known, the need to know anything, the need to be supported, the need to control, your personal association with fear, and your vendetta against yourself. And at the very end, I just wrote, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all of the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. And that's from the Course. I just want to say thank you for letting me share here tonight.
Thank you, Stefanie. It's been wonderful.
Clive, you look like that famous actor, John, what's his name? He's a comedian.
John Goodman.
No, the big guy, John Candy.
No,
John
Goodman.
Just because I'm Canadian, she went with John Candy, but I think I'm closer to John Goodman. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're funny as well.
Yeah, well, you better learn to laugh your way through this situation. And
Exactly.
I tell you, it's every day. There is so much humor. I know Teddy knows that. That's why we're laughing so much.
You really gotta laugh. You gotta start to laugh at just about everything. We'll talk about, like, the person will talk about, having a grievance against the guy next door. At some point in time, man, you just gotta start to laugh. The stupidity. When I had this thing happen to me, I mean, I saw how it's all just an illusion. None of it's real. And to get hung up for a second, it's not that you don't look at it, but to get hung up on something that has no reality whatsoever, it's really laughable when you think about it.
It's so, I got to just say, there's a lot of baggage with the word illusion. It's all illusion. It's all illusion. But when I mentioned last week that I got really sick, when I came out of that afterwards, everything was just a movie. It's all a movie. It's just the script writer is unbelievably funny and he wants you to buy into the movie. But you go into a movie theater and you get caught up in it for a moment. You actually think it's really happening. You got all the emotions going on. Then the lights come on, you leave the theater and you go on with your life. But if you can just remember in that one moment, shit, this guy showing up at 5:30 in the morning in the driveway. I mean, what a freaking great movie. Okay, what's next? That's unbelievable.
Yep.
Except when you believe it, then it's totally believable. But other than that, it's unbelievable.
Thanks again, Stefanie, for coming. It's been really good.
Thank you for having me. Us. But Lloyd was a little quieter tonight, and I was quieter last time. So,
well, it was your turn to shine, Steffi.
That's right.
Maybe we can get you back sometime for a duet.
That'd be lovely. We can duets all the time.
Yeah, we would sleep together.
Thanks so much, you guys.
Thank you. We'll see you guys again.
It's a blast.
Yeah.